Hey guys, welcome to Neighbor Stories with JusRead. Today we're diving into some incredible stories about overcoming the toughest neighbor disputes. Our story is titled, We Built 50 Gardens in 24 Hours After Homeowners Association Banned Them. The story starts like this. It all started on a sunny Saturday morning in May. I was out in my front yard, tending to my prized tomato plants, when I noticed a group of people gathered around the community bulletin board at the end of our cul-de-sac. Curiosity got the better of me, so I set down my gardening shears and wandered over to see what all the fuss was about. As I approached, I could hear angry muttering and see people gesturing wildly. My neighbor, Sarah, spotted me and waved me over with a grim look on her face. "Hey John, have you seen this?" she asked, pointing to a bright yellow notice pinned to the board. I squinted at the paper, my jaw dropping as I read the bold text at the top. Notice, of new Homeowners Association regulation, all front yard gardens prohibited effective immediately. "What the hell?" I exclaimed, my voice rising in disbelief. "They can't do this, can they?" Sarah shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Apparently, they can. Look at the fine print." They're citing some obscure clause in the Homeowners Association agreement about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics or some bullcrap like that. I scanned the rest of the notice, my blood pressure rising with each ridiculous line. According to the new regulation, all front yard vegetable gardens, flower beds, and even potted plants visible from the street were now banned. Homeowners had 72 hours to remove any offending greenery or face steep fines. "This is insane," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Half the neighborhood has gardens. What about Mrs. Johnson's roses? Or the Patel's beautiful marigolds?" "I know," Sarah replied, her voice tight with anger. "And what about your tomatoes? You've been growing those for years." I glanced back at my yard, where my lovingly tended tomato plants were basking in the morning sun. The thought of ripping them out made my stomach churn. "We can't let this stand," I said firmly, turning back to Sarah. "There's got to be something we can do." As we stood there, more neighbors joined our impromptu gathering. The air was thick with frustration and disbelief as people shared their shock and outrage. "I've had my herb garden for a decade, Mrs. Rodriguez," an elderly woman from down the street said tearfully. "It's how I remember my late husband. We planted it together." "And what about the community garden project we just started for the kids at the elementary school?" Mr. Thompson, a local teacher, chimed in. "Are we supposed to just abandon that too?" As I listened to my neighbors' stories, a spark of determination ignited within me. This wasn't just about vegetables or flowers, it was about our community, our homes, and our right to use our property as we saw fit. "All right, everyone," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the crowd. "This is ridiculous, and we all know it, but getting angry isn't going to solve anything. We need a plan. What can we do?" Someone called out. "The Homeowners Association has all the power." I took a deep breath, an idea forming in my mind. It was crazy, possibly even a little reckless, but it just might work. "Maybe they do have the power right now," I replied, "but we have something they don't: numbers. And passion? What if we showed them exactly how much these gardens mean to us?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking, John?" I grinned, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. "They've given us 72 hours to remove our gardens, right? Well, what if instead of removing them, we doubled down? What if we built even more gardens all over the neighborhood in that time?" There was a moment of stunned silence before the crowd erupted in a mix of excited chatter and skeptical murmurs. "Are you crazy?" Mr. Thompson asked, but I could see a glimmer of interest in his eyes. "How would we even do that?" "Together," I said simply. "We pool our resources, our skills, and our time. We work in shifts, around the clock if we have to. We turn every bare patch of grass into a garden. Make it so overwhelming that the Homeowners Association can't possibly enforce their ridiculous rule." As I spoke, I could see the idea taking root in my neighbors' minds. The anger and frustration were being replaced by something else: hope, determination, and a sense of shared purpose. "I'm in," Sarah said firmly, stepping up beside me. "My cousin owns a landscaping business. I bet I could get him to donate some supplies." "I can coordinate volunteers," Mr. Thompson offered. "Get some of my students involved too. They'd love a project like this." One by one, people started chiming in with offers of help, resources, and ideas. The energy was palpable, electric almost, as our community came together in the face of this threat. "All right," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Let's do this. We've got 72 hours to turn our neighborhood into a garden paradise. Who's with me?" The resounding cheer that went up was all the answer I needed. As we dispersed to start planning and gathering supplies, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in my neighbors. We were about to embark on something big, something that would show the Homeowners Association, and maybe even ourselves, just what our community was capable of when we worked together. Little did I know, as I headed back to my tomato plants with a newfound determination, that the next 72 hours would be some of the most challenging, exhausting, and ultimately rewarding of my life. The rest of that Saturday was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and I quickly established ourselves as the de facto leaders of our impromptu rebellion. We set up a command center of sorts in my garage, with a large whiteboard where we started mapping out our plan. "Okay," I said, uncapping a marker. First things first, we need to inventory what we have and what we need. Sarah nodded, already on her phone. I'm texting my cousin now about supplies. He says he can get us soil, mulch, and some basic gardening tools by this evening. Perfect, I replied, jotting it down. Now, what about plants? As if on cue, Mrs. Rodriguez hobbled into the garage, a twinkle in her eye. I may have a solution for that, she said with a sly smile. I've been propagating plants as a hobby for years. My basement is full of seedlings and cuttings just waiting for a home. I grinned, adding it to our growing list of resources. Mrs. Rodriguez, you're a lifesaver. Over the next few hours, a steady stream of neighbors came through, offering what they could. The Patels had a greenhouse and promised to contribute vegetable seedlings. Mr. Thompson had already rallied a group of high school students eager to help with the heavy lifting. Even old Mr. Grumpy, Mr. Jenkins, from 2 doors down grudgingly offered the use of his pickup truck for hauling supplies. By late afternoon, we had a solid plan in place. We divided the neighborhood into sectors, with team leaders assigned to each. We had supply chains set up, volunteer schedules drafted, and even a menu planned for keeping our workers fed, courtesy of Mrs. Rodriguez and her famous empanadas. As the sun began to set, I stood in my driveway, surveying the bustle of activity. People were unloading trucks of soil and mulch, setting up work lights for the night shift, and excitedly discussing plans for their new gardens. Sarah joined me, a smudge of dirt on her cheek and a wide smile on her face. Can you believe this? She asked, gesturing at the scene before us. I shook my head, still somewhat in awe. Honestly? No. But it's happening? Just then, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A man in an expensive-looking suit stepped out, his face twisted in a scowl. I recognized him immediately, David Hartley, the president of our Homeowners Association. Uh-oh, Sarah muttered. Trouble at 2 o'clock. Hartley marched up to us, his face red with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded, waving a copy of the garden ban notice in our faces. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. We're gardening, Mr. Hartley. Is there a problem? He spluttered, clearly caught off guard by my calm demeanor. A problem? Did you not read the notice? All front yard gardens are now prohibited. Oh, we read it, Sarah chimed in, her voice sickly sweet. We just decided it was ridiculous and chose to ignore it. Hartley's face grew even redder, if that was possible. You can't just ignore Homeowners Association regulations. I'll have you all fined. I cut him off, my patience wearing thin. You'll what, David? Fine? The entire neighborhood? Take us all to court? Go ahead. But take a look around first. I gestured to the bustling activity all around us. Neighbors laughing and working together, children excitedly planting flowers, elderly residents sharing gardening tips with teenagers. This is what community looks like, I said firmly. These gardens bring people together. They beautify our neighborhood. They provide food and flowers and a sense of pride. If you want to destroy all that, go ahead. But know that you'll be fighting every single person who lives here. Hartley opened and closed his mouth a few times, clearly at a loss for words. Finally, he straightened his tie and tried to regain his composure. This isn't over, he growled, turning on his heel and stalking back to his car. As he drove away, Sarah let out a low whistle. Well, that went about as well as expected. I nodded, a mix of worry and determination settling in my gut. Yeah, but he's right about one thing. This isn't over. We've got a long night ahead of us, and I have a feeling Hartley isn't going to make it easy. Sarah grinned, bumping her shoulder against mine. Bring it on? We've got an army of gardeners on our side. As night fell, our army kicked into high gear. The neighborhood was transformed into a hive of activity, with floodlights illuminating yards and the sounds of shovels, laughter, and the occasional curse when someone stumbled in the dark filling the air. I found myself bouncing from yard to yard, helping where I could and marveling at the progress. In the Johnsons' yard, a group of teenagers were creating a butterfly garden, carefully planting milkweed and other pollinator-friendly flowers. Next door, the Patel family was expanding their vegetable patch, with Mr. Patel excitedly explaining the benefits of companion planting to anyone who would listen. Around midnight, I took a break to grab some coffee and check in at our command center. Sarah was there, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, intently studying our master plan. How are we doing? I asked, handing her a steaming mug. She took a grateful sip before answering. Better than I expected, honestly. We've got about 20 gardens completed or near completion. But, she trailed off, biting her lip. But what? I prompted, sensing her hesitation. Sarah sighed. Hartley's been busy. He's called the police twice claiming we're disturbing the peace. Luckily, Officer Martinez is on duty and she's on our side. She just keeps telling him it's a civil matter. I nodded, relieved. Officer Martinez's kid was in Mr. Thompson's class and had been excited about the school garden project. It was good to have allies in unexpected places. Anything else? I asked, bracing myself for more bad news. Well, Sarah said, pulling out her phone, he's been sending out mass emails to everyone in the Homeowners Association, threatening fines, legal action, even eviction for blatant disregard of Homeowners Association regulations. It's all bluster, but it's scaring some people. I felt a flare of anger. He can't do that. Those threats are baseless. Sarah nodded in agreement. I know, and I've been doing my best to reassure people. But Hartley's always ruled by fear. It's how he's kept control of the homeowners association for so long. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration mounting. We need to do something to counter this. Show people they don't have to be afraid. Just then, Mr. Thompson burst into the garage, out of breath and wide-eyed. John, Sarah, you need to see this. We followed him out to the street, where a small crowd had gathered. To my shock, I saw a tow truck parked in front of Sarah's house, its lights flashing in the darkness. What the hell? I muttered, jogging over. As we got closer, I could see Hartley standing next to the truck, a smug smile on his face. Sarah's car was already hooked up to the tow truck. What's going on here? I demanded, positioning myself between Hartley and the growing crowd of angry neighbors. Hartley's smile grew wider, reminding me uncomfortably of a shark. Just enforcing homeowners association regulations, he said smoothly. Article 7 Section 3 clearly states that all vehicles must be parked in driveways or garages overnight. Ms. Connor's car is parked on the street, in clear violation. I glanced at Sarah, who looked both furious and bewildered. My driveway is full of gardening supplies, she sputtered. Where else was I supposed to park? Not my problem, Hartley replied with a shrug. Rules are rules. The crowd around us was growing, murmurs of anger and disbelief rippling through it. I could feel the situation teetering on the edge of something ugly. Taking a deep breath, I turned to address our neighbors. Everyone please, stay calm. This is exactly what he wants, to provoke us into doing something we'll regret. Turning back to Hartley, I fixed him with a hard stare. You're really going to do this? Tow someone's car in the middle of the night over a petty parking violation? Hartley's smug smile never wavered. Like I said, rules are rules. If you all can ignore the gardening regulations, I can enforce any other rule I see fit. I was about to argue further when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, a determined look on her face. John dear, she said loudly, making sure Hartley could hear, why don't we all chip in to pay for Sarah's car to be released? And then she can park in my driveway. I don't use it anyway since I don't drive anymore. A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. People were already pulling out wallets and checkbooks. I couldn't help but smile at Hartley's crestfallen expression. Well, Mr. Hartley, I said, it seems like we have a solution. Unless there are any other rules you'd like to enforce tonight? Hartley's face twisted in anger, but he clearly realized he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Without another word, he stomped back to his car and drove off, leaving the tow truck driver looking confused. As our neighbors rallied around Sarah, paying the tow fee and helping her move her car, I felt a renewed sense of determination. Hartley had shown his true colors tonight, and in doing so, he'd only strengthened our resolve. All right everyone, I called out, once the excitement had died down, let's get back to work. We've got a lot of gardens left to build, and dawn's coming fast. As people dispersed, returning to their tasks with renewed energy, Sarah sidled up to me. That was a close one, she murmured. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. Yeah, but did you see how everyone came together? Hartley doesn't stand a chance against this kind of unity. Sarah grinned, her earlier distress replaced by fierce determination. You're right. So, what's our next move? Gardener-in-chief? I laughed at the impromptu title. Now, we keep going. We build so many beautiful gardens that even Hartley can't deny how much better they make our neighborhood. And that's exactly what we did. As the night wore on, our little rebellion grew. Word spread to neighboring streets, and soon we had volunteers showing up from all over the area. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, we had completed over 30 gardens, with more underway. The transformation was stunning. Dull, manicured lawns had been replaced with vibrant flower beds, vegetable patches, and native plant gardens. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and rich earth. As I stood on my front porch, surveying our handiwork with a mixture of exhaustion and pride, I spotted a familiar figure walking down the street. It was Carl, one of Hartley's staunchest supporters on the Homeowners Association board. I tensed, preparing for another confrontation, but to my surprise, Carl stopped in front of my yard, a look of wonder on his face. This is incredible, he said, gesturing to the newly planted butterfly garden that now graced my front yard. I had no idea it could look like this. I blinked, caught off guard by his reaction. Thanks, Carl. Would you like a closer look? He nodded eagerly, and I led him through the garden, pointing out the different plants and explaining their purposes. As we talked, I could see something changing in Carl's expression. You know, he said slowly, I always voted for the strict landscaping rules because I thought it kept our property values up. But this is something special. I smiled, sensing an opportunity. It's not just about looks, Carl. These gardens bring people together. They're good for the environment. They provide food, they create habitats for birds and insects. They make our neighborhood feel alive. Carl nodded thoughtfully. I can see that now. And the way everyone came together to do this, it's pretty amazing. Just then, Sarah jogged up, looking exhausted but exhilarated. John, you won't believe it. We just finished our 50th garden over on Maple Street. We did it. I grinned, pulling her into a quick hug. That's incredible. I can't believe we actually pulled this off. Carl cleared his throat, looking slightly uncomfortable. Listen, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear this from, but I think I made a mistake supporting that gardening ban. This is clearly important to the community. Is there anything I can do to help?" Sarah and I exchanged shocked looks. This was an unexpected turn of events. "Actually," I said slowly, "an idea forming. There might be. How would you feel about calling an emergency homeowners association meeting?" Carl nodded, a determined look settling on his face. "Consider it done. I'll contact the other board members right away." As Carl hurried off to make his calls, Sarah turned to me with a raised eyebrow. "Well, that was unexpected. Do you think we've actually won?" I shook my head, feeling cautiously optimistic but still wary. "Not yet, but we've made one hell of a statement. Now we just need to make sure the homeowners association listens." The Emergency Homeowners Association meeting was scheduled for that evening in the community center. As Sarah and I walked in, I was amazed to see the place packed to capacity. It seemed like every resident in the neighborhood had shown up, many still dirt-stained from our 24-hour gardening marathon. Hartley was at the front of the room, looking decidedly uncomfortable as he called the meeting to order. I couldn't help but notice that several board members, including Carl, were pointedly not sitting with him. "Before we begin," Hartley said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone, "I want to acknowledge the unusual circumstances that have led to this meeting. Over the past 24 hours, numerous residents have violated homeowners association regulations by installing unauthorized gardens. This meeting is to address this situation and determine our course of action." A murmur ran through the crowd. I stood up, catching Hartley's eye. "If I may, Mr. Hartley, I think we need to address why those gardens were installed in the first place." Hartley's jaw clenched, but he nodded stiffly. "Very well, John. You have the floor?" I took a deep breath and stepped to the front of the room. Looking out at my neighbors, friends old and new, all united by our shared act of rebellion, I felt a surge of confidence. "Friends, neighbors," I began, "we're here because a decision was made without our input, a decision that affected all of us and the very nature of our community. The ban on front yard gardens wasn't just about plants or property values. It was about our right to use our land as we see fit, to express ourselves, to contribute to our environment." I gestured to the room at large. "Look around. Every person here participated in what we accomplished over the past 24 hours. We built 50 new gardens. We transformed our neighborhood. But more than that, we came together as a community in a way I've never seen before." The room erupted in applause and cheers. I waited for it to die down before continuing. "The gardens we built aren't just beautiful, they're functional. They'll provide food for families and habitats for wildlife. They'll reduce water usage compared to lawns. They'll bring neighbors together as we share produce and gardening tips. Is this really something we want to ban?" I turned to face Hartley and the board directly. "I propose that we not only overturn the garden ban but that we go further. Let's create guidelines that encourage sustainable, beautiful landscaping. Let's become known as the neighborhood that values community, sustainability, and natural beauty over cookie-cutter lawns." As I finished speaking, the room erupted once again. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering. I could see Hartley shrinking in his seat, the tide of public opinion clearly turning against him. To my surprise, it was Carl who stood up next. "As a member of the Homeowners Association Board," he said, his voice ringing out over the crowd, "I move that we immediately rescind the garden ban and begin work on new landscaping guidelines that encourage the type of community-oriented, sustainable gardens we've seen created over the past day." Another board member quickly seconded the motion. Hartley, clearly recognizing defeat, called for a vote. It was nearly unanimous, with only Hartley himself abstaining. As the meeting adjourned, the room was buzzing with excitement. People were already discussing plans for more gardens, community composting projects, and a neighborhood farmers market. Sarah found me in the crowd, pulling me into a fierce hug. "We did it," she exclaimed. "I can't believe we actually did it." I hugged her back, feeling a mix of elation and exhaustion. "We all did it," I corrected her. "Every single person who picked up a shovel or planted a seed. This was a true community effort." As we made our way out of the community center, I was stopped repeatedly by neighbors wanting to share their excitement or thank me for speaking up. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Finally, breaking free of the crowd, Sarah and I stood in the parking lot, looking out over our transformed neighborhood. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the new gardens, making them look almost magical. "So," Sarah said, bumping her shoulder against mine, "what's next for the great garden revolutionary?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Honestly, I think I'm going to go home and sleep for about 12 hours straight. But after that, who knows? I have a feeling this is just the beginning for our little community." As we said our goodnights and I began the short walk home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. We had faced a challenge, come together as a community, and emerged stronger for it. Our neighborhood would never be the same, and that was a very good thing. Stepping into my front yard, I paused to admire the new butterfly garden. A monarch butterfly fluttered past, as if welcoming this new, greener version of our community. I smiled, thinking of all the possibilities that lay ahead. We had planted more than just gardens today. We had planted the seeds of a stronger, more unified neighborhood, and I couldn't wait to see how it would grow. And guys, With this we have reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed this epic neighbor showdown, please smash that like button, comment with some house emojis to show your support, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks a lot, and I will see you again tomorrow with another amazing story.